Hey everyone, and welcome to Risky Business. My name's Patrick Gray, and as you can tell from my voice and probably my appearance, if you're joining us on YouTube this week, I am a little bit under the weather. I've spent the last few days in bed, but I am feeling well enough to record today's podcast, so that's great. This week's show is brought to you by Push Security, and we're going to be joined by Dan Cuthbert, who is a fairly well-known guy in InfoSec, in the old cybersecurity. And these days, Dan works for Santander Bank, where he does all sorts of interesting cybersecurity work. And he's joining us to talk about products like Push and what you could do with them from like a detection engineering standpoint, and just like generally what you could do with the types of data that come out of products like Push. For those who don't remember, Push primarily is a browser plugin based solution that captures stuff like login events, whether that's login events into third-party SaaS, basically, so you can get all of that information. You can also put controls around third-party SaaS using Push, and just generally it's turning out to be a very useful thing. So Dan is joining us later to talk through all of that. But first up, of course, it is time for a check of the week's news headlines with Adam Boileau. And mate, what looks to be a brewing scandal this week. Last week, of course, we talked about how everyone's SharePoints were getting owned by the Chinese government, which was not a good time for people with SharePoint boxes. But now it looks like there might have been a leak out of Microsoft relating to these bugs. But it's all a little bit like, I don't know if there's any like smoking gun here yet, but something weird definitely happened with Microsoft's so-called MAPP program. Walk us through this.
Yeah, the timing of these leaks or of the exploitation is certainly, it's interesting at the very least. So the story goes that the original SharePoint bug was disclosed at Pwn to Own in Berlin by a Vietnamese hacker. He handed it off during that competition to a Microsoft representative to go off and do the patching thing. About 60 days later, Microsoft came up with a patch. In the MAPP program, there's kind of like two levels. There's a quite highly vetted one where you get like 5 days advance notification of patches, and then there's the more like the slightly broader MAPP program where you get a day worth of prior notification. The day before the patch is due to be released, it gets sent out to MAPP, and then that day it starts to be attacked in the wild. And there are a number of Chinese companies that are members of the MAPP program, and there's some, like Microsoft says they're investigating whether or not these facts are related, but the glove does fit a little bit as to whether or not.
I mean, kind of, but like, do we really expect that someone, say someone close to the government working for one of these companies in China, because there's plenty of Chinese companies that are part of the MAPP program, right? Are we seriously saying that someone worked at one of those Chinese companies, saw that Microsoft was going to patch these bugs, and they had time to like reverse engineer the patch and come up with a functioning exploit in that time? Or do we think it's more likely that it's the case where, maybe there was a leak and someone realized, oh my God, our SharePoint bugs that we've been using at low volume are about to get patched. Let's go big with these now. Because that to me feels like kind of the more realistic scenario.
Yeah, I mean, the bug in question isn't super complicated. Like, it is just .NET deserialization, and then was an auth bypass that was related, so you could get to that endpoint without auth. So in that respect, like, finding the bug if you'd seen the patch and then turning it into an exploit probably is feasible within the time frame we're talking about. But I do feel like your instinct of that, probably it's a bug that was already being used. And the fact that it's about to get burnt all of a sudden means you may as well hand it out or let a bunch of people off the leash that have been a bit more tightly controlled in its use. That's kind of more, that sounds pretty believable as well. But I don't think it would be impossible for it to be the other explanation.
Yeah, I mean, either way, though, like a program like this leaking is extremely not great. I still feel like programs like this develop more good than bad, though. Like, even if you're going to have the occasional leak like this. But, I mean, it is embarrassing, right? Because the Hafnium, like the Exchange stuff that Hafnium used in, like, when was that, 2021, all the Exchange hacks like that apparently leaked out of MAPP as well. So, like, this isn't the first time. It's not a good look.
No, it's not. And, these programs are always going to be this kind of trade-off, right? I mean, every sort of private vulnerability disclosure group, everything going back to like Zardos, have been sources of leaks or have been sources of hacks. People used to break into security researchers to get access to their stash back in the, in the 90s as well. So, trading in this kind of information, makes a lot of sense, and the net benefit probably still worth it.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, let's see if there's a complete investigation from Microsoft there. I suspect this is the last we're ever going to hear of it, but anyway. Now, look, just staying on the SharePoint thing, apparently we've graduated from Chinese APTs using this bug, and now various attackers based out of China also are using the bug to deploy something called the Warlock ransomware. So good news, everyone. It's now being used for ransomware as well as espionage. I guess that great news. Good job, everybody.
I mean, it makes sense when you've got groups that do both of these things, like do espionage and also do ransomware to pay the bills. So not that surprising. But we have seen, I think like 400 companies, agencies, government departments, whatever, breached using the bug. So that's, a lot of people have SharePoint on the internet, and some of those are pretty big organizations. I think one victim we saw talked about the U.S. Department of Energy said its National Nuclear Security Administration was a victim, and that's not good.
No, but you would imagine that the National Nuclear Security Administration, does not rely on its Windows network in such a way that it getting owned would cause mushroom clouds or, dirty material to be sprayed about everywhere. It makes for a good headline, but I mean, the people who work there, they're not dumb, right?
No, it's still not good though.
No, it ain't. So yeah, we got another story here also from Cybersecurity Dive talking about this stuff as well. That goes into the Department of Energy thing. So we've linked through to those in this week's show notes. We need to update something we spoke about last week. So we spoke about this work out of a company called Expel, where they'd figured out apparently how to bypass FIDO, U2F auth using cross-device authentication. And you even mentioned at the time. Now, normally there's a proximity check for that. Via Bluetooth to make sure that the device is in the right place and blah, blah, blah. And in some reason it didn't work here. Well, Adam, turns out this bypass that they claimed just didn't happen. They misread the logs. They've now published a mea culpa blog post. But yeah, so it turns out that skipping of that step just never happened.
Yeah, so it turns out they were working off, I think, logs from Okta. So the attacker in this case was authenticating to Okta, and either they misinterpreted the logs or the logs weren't super clear. And, sometimes logs from cloud services can be difficult to interpret when you don't have the context of the system that's, behind the scenes, the implementation that you can't necessarily see. But, it's one of those extraordinary claims requires, extraordinary proof, and they kind of didn't have it. So, I feel a little bit vindicated in the sense that I remember reading this and going, well, it feels like there's something missing here, but I mean, if they're saying it happened, then I guess, I don't know what that missing thing is, but turns out, yes, the missing thing was it didn't happen.
It's real funny, right? Because I think that headline hit my podcatcher the last day I was in Fiji. And I just remember seeing it, a headline from us saying, oh yeah, there's a FIDO or U2F bypass. And I just remember going, ooh, reminded me of earlier in my career, I remember around 2000, early 2000s, every week someone would claim to have broken SSL, right? And every week it was some really weird exotic config. You could get it to maybe do a thing that was strange and you might recover a couple of bytes or something like that.
Yeah,
but it was
and you
always
40 gig of traffic to do it. And,
yeah, exactly. But it was always written up as SSL completely smashed, and I just had a flashback in the moment that I saw that notification come up on the phone. So, I mean, from our point of view, there's not much you can do when a security company writes up, we saw these sequence of events. You don't really think to vet and cross-check that. In a technical blog post, you kind of would think that they know what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, and usually companies will publish as much technical detail as they are able to, and if the technical detail that you want as a reader isn't there, it's because they can't publish it for some reason, whatever that is. They don't have it, they don't know, they're not allowed to, it's a customer's details, whatever it is. And so, yeah, you do just have to take it a little bit on faith that when they say, we saw this and these are the conclusions, that they've done their work. And yeah, in this case, they didn't.
They had not, dear listener. Now, let's talk about T. Now, T is a app that bills itself as being for women's safety, and I think the idea seems to be that, like, you can do some research on men in your area, see if they've got, like, criminal convictions, and see if any other T user has, said, oh, we found out this guy's dating like 6 people at once, that sort of thing, or this guy's really dangerous and creepy and everybody should stay away from him. That's kind of the idea behind this app. Unfortunately, it looks like the people who built the app didn't do it in a very secure way. So there's been a fairly major breach. There's been 2, right? There's the major one that this whole story began with, where someone grabbed, it looks like their user verification database, like containing selfies and pictures of IDs, going up to sometime in 2023. They've moved to some sort of new verification process where they're not storing that sort of information, which is what they should have been doing in the first place, but it looks like, some of the older stuff got out. This has been all over 4chan with people saying horrible things about the women who are users of this app and, just exactly the sort of, discussions you would expect from a bunch of 4chan incels when something like this happens. But since then, other people have gone and looked at this app as well and discovered that the security situation there is extremely not great. Someone was able to recover a whole bunch of messages between users talking about extremely personal things, and then showed that material off to people who work at 404 Media. Unsure whether or not that second tranche of information involving very personal messages has been obtained by anyone else. You would think that's a possibility, but we don't know that yet. Either way, if you're going to provide people with an app like this, you really want to make sure you do a better job than usual, is my feeling, right? Especially when women might be having discussions with each other about violent men, about creepy men. The last thing you want is what you've said about a creepy man being made public, right? Because that seems quite dangerous to me.
Yeah, it's certainly a really good example of a place where, like, the normal, like, minimum viable product, let's just, I don't know, they vibe coded this, but let's just kind of come up with something that does what we need and then iterate as we get more users and we get, a bit bigger and able to afford it. Sometimes that's not the right approach. And in this particular case where you're dealing with, foreseeing that a group like 4chan would sink its teeth into something like this isn't a big stretch. Especially when they are, as you say, the subject of many of the conversations being had in apps like this. And yeah, it's, the second bug you were talking about, or the second leak that you're talking about with the direct messages, some of the reporting said that was, as an authenticated user, you could talk to the direct messaging API endpoint, and via that you could get other people's messages. So like a pretty straightforward kind of, API security, cross-role, cross-account sort of thing. The sort of thing that, pretty standard type of pen testing or pretty standard sort of security review would ideally spot. So that is kind of concerning when you're dealing with sensitive data like this, that there's basic things like that, ideally you should do before you launch something like this.
Yeah, how did the other data get out, the pictures of the IDs and whatever?
So that breach, it looked like it was some kind of unsecured database.
Just like an open bucket or an actual database?
I think it's some kind of open database. I imagine it's probably some kind of NoSQL database-y kind of thing. I think this thing was built on Google Firebase. I'm not sure what the standard kind of data store that people would use with Firebase apps is. But, that felt like a pretty normal, we are early in our dev cycle and we just forgot about auth in the backend system that we're using, or we moved away from that system and then just forgot about it instead of actively decommissioning it. So yeah, not good.
Yeah, the fact that some of this data, like it's old data and finishes from some date in 2023, suggests that this app is years old. And you would have to think nobody did a pen test or a review on this.
That's kind of what it feels like, or it was pretty flimsy, or like if you had even opened this up to like bug bountying, like it would not have lasted with this kind of bug very long. It's exactly the sort of thing that, people who review mobile apps with security for a living will find. So yeah, it does feel like probably they just kind of winged it early startup phase and then never really got back to doing it properly. So, yeesh.
Yeah, it's anyway. So anyway, let's hope that second tranche of information does not wind up in the public domain? Because I have a feeling that would be the really dangerous stuff that would actually put people at risk. So, let's hope that it just stays as, but even the IDs and stuff, they've got people's addresses on them, and it's just not good.
It's really not good.
It is really not good. Now, we've got some reporting from the New York Times here where the top lawyer at the NSA, April Falcon Doss, she was appointed general counsel in April 2022 by the Biden administration, and she has now been fired. And this is due, it looks like, to Laura Loomer not liking her. Now, of course, it was Laura Loomer who complained about the director and deputy director of NSA and got them fired, and now it looks like she's done it again. And, you search on X and for this woman's name, and you see stuff like, here we go, Deep State, Biden burrowed a far-left Democrat activist into the NSA before he left office. April Falcon Doss has written extensively about her hatred of President Trump and supported the prosecution of Michael Flynn and Carter Page and blah, 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 blah. So it looks like it's this sort of stuff bubbling up through, the online fever swamp of MAGA, and then winding up with the Swamp Queen, Laura Loomer, and from there, then she gets fired. So, look, on one hand, this is bad, right? But on the other hand, I kind of feel like it's encouraging that the reason she's being fired is so stupid. Does that make sense? Like, she's not being fired because she was refusing to allow the administration to do something extremely illegal. She's fired because a bunch of, weirdos on the internet think she's a deep state, far leftist, Biden plant. And that's a good sign? Is that a good sign?
We really do want, any sort of good sign at this point would be great. So it's, we are kind of looking for them, but it's just no way to run a sensible, legitimate country, and I just, it's, when they review this in 5-10 years time, when the US comes out of this mad phase.
Oh, do not make assumptions like that, my friend. Do not make assumptions like that. That the United States is coming out of a phase, man. Do not. That is a dangerous assumption, my friend.
Oh dear. I guess we live in hope, right? But maybe I will be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm not wrong.
Yeah, well, look, I can't imagine someone who's risen through the ranks to become general counsel at an organization like NSA is going to have a terribly hard time finding work. So I think she will be fine. It'll be interesting to see who they try to put into that job. I think that's going to be the more important news, to see whether they get someone who's just boring, who says the right things on social media. That's fine, or whether or not they just, select some absolute lunatic, which we've seen a few times, right? So fun times. We have some research to talk about here from Googient, Mandoogle, from Mandiant, which is, of course, now part of Google, looking at what the Scattered Spider kids have been getting up to when it comes to VMware. Some of this stuff is interesting, like some of the walkthroughs of how they're avoiding detection when they're working their way through all of this vSphere stuff is interesting in that it works, but they're also doing unnecessary steps. And they obviously don't understand how this stuff works 100%, but the point is they know it well enough to get the job done. But I just generally thought this was an interesting write-up.
Yeah, it was kind of talks through how they, once they've landed on a network, typically through social engineering to get a password reset, and then onwards from there, into privileged access and Active Directory, leverage that onwards to VMware vCenter, and the fact that they will then typically connect directly to the ESX, the underlying hypervisor hosts, which have different kind of sets of logging. A lot of people focus their VMware logging on vCenter because that's where the real administrators do their work. And the ESX hosts typically are not end user, end admin, used much. And some of the logging, unfortunately, is off by default, which is not great either. And then they talk through some of the other tradecraft that they use. And the one that we've seen, making some comedy on social media, InfoSec-focused social media, is them attacking domain controllers from the hypervisor. So pulling the disks off the domain controller and using that to steal the underlying ndds.dit file that gives you all the credentials for the environment. The funny thing is the scattered spider kids have been like turning off the domain controller VM so that they can unmount the disk and then mount it somewhere else to access the files without realizing you could just snapshot it. You can read it out of the underlying block device on the ESX. There's plenty of ways to do this that don't involve interrupting service and getting snapped. But on the other hand, probably it doesn't matter, because if you're about to ransomware them anyway, they're going to notice. It's kind of the point. So
yeah, I mean, if they've got 10 minutes to stop you, like, what's the difference?
Yeah, exactly. I guess how many organizations are going to be able to identify the cause of a domain controller being shut down? And typically you'd pick a secondary DC in some obscure location. At least I would if it was me. I mean, it's kind of funny because in the end, it just works. And as we often say on the show, it's really not dumb if it works.
Yeah. But I do find it funny. I do find it funny that like people who do know how this stuff works well are sort of being a little bit superior on social media, just saying, "Oh, look at these silly spiders and how they're doing it. They don't need to do that."
we do this off the block device like real hackers. But exactly. On the other hand, it gets the job done. And you stole the NTDS.tit. What more do you need?
That's right. Now, look, speaking of VMware, we've got a story here from the Register written by an old mate of mine, actually, Simon Sharwood. Hello, Simon, if you happen to be listening. And Broadcom playing funny buggers with patches again. So if you've got, some of these tiers like perpetual licenses to VMware, Broadcom made all the noises last time this was an issue about how, no, it's fine. You'll be able to get security patches. Don't worry, even if you're not paying for support and whatever. Looks like that process ain't working at the moment, and there's a bunch of people who just can't get patches for their VMware stuff, which, look, and I actually spoke to Simon as he was writing this one. We just had a chat, we caught up, and if you've got VMware on the internet, you're going to have a bad time. So I don't know, like, patched versus unpatched VMware, I mean, it's only marginally a worse time if you're unpatched, right? Like, eventually you're going to have a bad time anyway. But this is extremely not great. This is really not good by Broadcom, and it's like this is the sort of stuff that VMware customers have been complaining about since day one, since Broadcom took it over.
Yeah, exactly. And you sort of get the feeling that the organization as a whole is just it's not a priority for them to make this process work, and the actual support people are like, this may take some time, and sometime maybe months in this case, which is especially not great when some of the most recent VMware bugs patched, I think this month. There's like 3 guest-to-host VM escapes, all of which were ZDI prone-to-own competition ones. So like VMware's like, these are not really 0 days. They're not really in the wild. It's like if people are dropping them at prone-to-own, you're kind of...
I mean, yeah, you could say, sure, okay. They're technically not in the wild, but how much... Let's spin up a poly market on whether they're going to be in the wild in a month.
Yeah, exactly, right. So a bit weaselly by Broadcom all the way down, which is unfortunately what we expect. And, VMware has just turned into such technical debt for so many organizations that built their whole stacks on this stuff, in that kind of early 2000s era when it was good, and now it's not. So
well, but the problem is it still works, doesn't it? And I've got mates who admin some of this stuff and they love it.
Yeah, I mean, the other options for virtualization at scale, other than pre-cloud, like infrastructure as a service cloud, VMware was the best option, and as you say, it does still work so long as you don't consider guest to host VM escapes as not working.
But that's what I mean. They don't, because like that's sort of don't worry about that. Like this is the way we've always done
it. Yeah, no, it's certainly a mess, and I don't know, Broadcom. Why you got to be like this, Broadcom? Why?
Yeah.
Why?
Now, Aeroflot having a bad time. This is Russia's largest airline, of course, and they got themselves owned by 2 groups. One of them was the Cyber Partisans, who are mostly associated with activity targeting the government in Belarus, or the regime in Belarus, and some other hacktivists. Silent Crow is this other group. So it's Silent Crow and the Belarusian Cyber Partisans have really done a number on Aeroflot. Apparently they were in there for a while and they managed to RMRF 7,000 servers, and this led to the cancellation of 100 flights and stranded travelers and a bunch of extremely satisfying images being put all over social media. What else do we know here? Did Aeroflot recover? Is this it? Is this just a Did we just get some nice images and that's it out of this?
So the Cyber Partisans have said that they exfilled a whole heap ton of information. So some of it's passenger records, which they said they're going to make available for independent investigators. So like the Bellingcats of this world will have access to flight records and passenger manifests and all those kinds of things inside Russia and outside, which, that's the sort of information that a group like that, really makes hay out of. And we've also seen, some bits about, internal conversations and some other kind of, scandalous sorts of things. So, they have said that they're going to leak a bunch of it. And I imagine they probably will, because why wouldn't you? As to how fast Aeroflot are recovering, I mean, it seems like they've got the planes back to functioning. But having been inside airline and airport networks, right, those things are quite complicated, and putting them back together in a way where everything works and all the integrations with third-party systems and crew management, like there's just a lot of moving parts in a modern airline. So I don't imagine this will be a particularly quick process. There wasn't any mention in this one of like one of the previous breaches of a big Russian organization. I think it was the Gazprom one. The Ukrainians said they destroyed the BIOSes of many of the systems. And like, that's the sort of thing that making, if you have to go replace motherboards or reflash BIOS chips to the extent that you even can, pull them and reflash them, anything that involves having to go physically touch a whole bunch of computers really slows down recovery. So they didn't seem to do this here. And I'm kind of, I'm always surprised now when we don't see people, physically destroy the hardware in this way when you're doing a destructive attack. Because, hey, why wouldn't you if you can, flash a bunch of stuff? So they seem to,
You seem disappointed. You seem underwhelmed. You would have preferred a little bit more carnage.
I wanted a little more, like overwriting the ROM chips on the network cards and on the video cards and on the, on the BIOSes. Like, why not just, make it so you can't boot these things ever again?
Well, apparently the network made heavy use of Windows XP and Win2K3. The CEO, Sergei Alexandrovsky, has not changed his password since 2022. So, there's some interesting stuff that came out of there. There's lots of, screenshots of like ancient Windows with like passwords.txt files on the desktop. And so you get the impression reading through this that perhaps Aeroflot's security wasn't in amazing shape. Now, Minnesota. The state of Minnesota is having a bad time. St. Paul, the city, its systems have been really worked over by attackers unknown, to the point that the governor, Tim Walz, has activated the state's National Guard to help respond. And what's interesting here is I did not realize that the National Guard in the United States has 50 dedicated cyber units, according to the Department of Defense. So that's good. I mean, having a group like that where you can break the glass and hit the old emergency button, that's handy.
Yeah, and especially, if you do have a big network that you got to rebuild in a hurry, having a group of people you can bring in who do at least know how to, build domain controllers, reset people's accounts, do all of that kind of, scaled, fiddly technical work that's not sophisticated, but it is, you got to get it right, and you don't want people who've never done that stuff before being the ones who have to do it in a crisis. So having this seems like the sort of thing that a National Guard is for. So there's not a lot of details, like we don't know if this is ransomware, we don't really know if it's not ransomware.
Now, it's not just Minnesota where people are having trouble. There's been a pretty serious outage targeting Post Luxembourg, which apparently also offered telco services, right? So their stuff's all been down. There was a major outage. It looks like they're back up and running now, though. But what do we know about this one?
So the details are a little bit slim in terms of the technical part, but it sounds like there was some kind of major cyberness going on at Post Luxembourg. It's the main state-owned telco as well as postal service there, and the impact of this seemed pretty bad. There were, flights delayed at the airport, emergency services, communications weren't working. So the local government told people that, if you want to report a fire, go walk down to the local fire station, right, and let them know. And same with the police. So that's not a great situation to be in. They seem to have pulled it back together relatively quickly. But yeah, pretty, it's underscores kind of how important comms is to all sorts of things. Because, phones were down, home internet services were down, emergency services, planes, point of sale systems, payment systems. So, pretty widespread, although Luxembourg's obviously not a very big place.
No, but apparently pro-Russian hacker groups have claimed responsibility for similar attacks in the past, right? So that might give us some indication as to what's happened here. Now, I love a good legal catfight, and that's exactly what this is, right? So Clorox, we all remember back, I can't believe that was in 2023.
Yeah, time flies.
It's like I
Time
blinked
flies.
and like it's, 2 years later? How did that happen? So Clorox, the bleach company, got owned hard in 2023, and to the point where like supermarkets weren't getting their deliveries of Clorox. Like, for people who don't remember, like it was a really serious attack. And Clorox, as it turns out, is a surprisingly huge company. Anyway, turns out they had outsourced like a bunch of their help desk stuff to Cognizant. And this is how Scattered Spider owned them. This is how they got the creds to own them, right? So now they're suing Cognizant, saying, you have to give us $380 million because these people owned us because of your negligence, and, you reset creds like completely outside of our policy, and we have the customer service calls that prove this. And Cognizant's response, I gotta say, and that seems like a reasonable complaint. So that's a reasonable complaint. But then you look at Cognizant's response, which is basically like, hey, we didn't run your network. We just managed some help desk stuff, and your security is inept. What did they say? It is shocking that a corporation the size of Clorox had such an inept internal cybersecurity system to mitigate this attack. Clorox has tried to blame us for these failures, but the reality is that Clorox hired Cognizant for a narrow scope of help desk services which Cognizant reasonably performed. Cognizant did not manage cybersecurity for Clorox. So, question to you, Adam. Do you think if you're doing outsourced help desk for someone and one of your people gets socially engineered because they went outside of policy, I mean, you would think there should be a, penalty for that. But do you think they should be blamed for the whole thing and pay $380 million? Because personally, I actually don't think so.
No, I think clearly delivering those services per the spec of the contract, and it's kind of up to the buyer to ensure that the spec of that contract is actually appropriate. I think there probably should be some reasonable penalties there, and I would certainly like to see organizations that do deliver this kind of outsourced, these kind of outsourced functions take those obligations really seriously. But that said, if one user account gets compromised and that results in your entire company getting ransomed into the ground, that's kind of a bigger problem than just your outsourced provider, right?
Yeah.
And the job of enterprise security is to deal with that inevitable failure of that someone's account's going to get compromised, there's going to be malicious inside, or whatever it happens to be, and then not have that turn into catastrophic enterprise-wide failure. That's the job of your enterprise security architecture. So
yeah, did you never tabletop or ponder or consider the possibility that the help desk might actually reset creds for someone when it's social engineering? Like that is just something that you never thought could happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
exactly.
come on.
So yeah. I mean, I would like to see everybody take a little bit more responsibility.
Yeah.
And people do outsource stuff without really thinking about, thinking that they can outsource responsibility. Like, you can't outsource blame. That's not how this works. But there's plenty of places that think you can. So yeah, everybody needs to do a better job, except maybe Scattered Spider, who clearly are doing all right.
Now we're going to talk about a Cisco bug. Now, you explained it to me earlier and I did laugh, but I'm sick, so I've forgotten. But it involves something of like just throwing Python code at these devices, and they just run the Python code, basically.
I mean, that is basically the summary of it. Yes, this is the Cisco Identity Services Engine, which is basically like their Radius and TACACS like authentication service. So pretty core security component in most people's environments. And yeah, there is an API endpoint, and you can just post Python to it and it runs it. That seems to be the bug. Like, I found some proof of concept code to like on GitHub to make sure I understood this, and it does. That seems to be all it does. They post to an API endpoint, here's the Python, and it runs it.
Do you need to give it some special characters first, or not? Just cut and paste some Python and away she goes.
No, you seem to just post Python to an API, like, and the API endpoint is like literally /admin/API, and then it runs to Python. Which, I mean, I love me some Python, so I'm into Python being executed. But in the context of your auth system, and I mean, this is the sort of thing that people would use for like tying certificate auth Wi-Fi networks to your AD, for example. It does that kind of like important auth glue situation. So really, you'd hope Cisco would have done a little bit better. But then again, you know, statistically, it's best practice for Cisco, I suppose.
Well,
So,
I wonder if there's also hard-coded creds on this box where you could use the Python to get you the.
probably that is how Cisco be. So. Yeah.
Just amazing. Now, this one we are not going to spend a lot of time talking about, but there is an interesting detail in it. John Greig has the write-up for The Record, a woman in Arizona, and we've talked about her getting arrested before. She was running one of these laptop farms for, North Korean remote workers. As you do, right? It's what do the Americans like to call it? It's a side hustle, right? Her side hustle was running a basement farm. A basement laptop farm for the North Korean government. She's been sentenced to 8.5 years for running her North Korean laptop farm, which I suppose seems like a reasonable penalty for someone who knew that that's what they were doing and wound up generating $17 million for the North Korean government. That's not great. But there's a fun detail in this one, Adam.
Yes, so she was an avid user of TikTok, and at some point on one of her posts to TikTok, she was making a video about an important topic. She said that she'd been very busy because her clients were quite demanding, the North Koreans being quite demanding that day, and she didn't have time to make breakfast, but she had been doing a diet challenge, and so she had just popped out to the shops to get a breakfast smoothie bowl. Rather than, because she didn't have time. She was so busy, installing remote access tools and posting laptops to China and whatever else. She didn't, so she went out, bought the smoothie bowl, brought it home, made a TikTok about her smoothie bowl and the success of her, of her diet program. Unfortunately, she did it in the room where her laptop farm was, and the laptop farm was clearly visible in the background, with the desktop screens up and the windows moving and the mouses going around as the Koreans were remotely using them. And apparently the FBI found that quite compelling when they were preparing the search warrants for her house. So what do we learn about our criminal conspiracies? Don't post them on TikTok.
Don't post them on TikTok. If you are making your, smoothie video and you're panning around your room and there's the bullet-riddled bodies behind you, maybe don't post. Same thing that goes for all of the scales and pots covered in white powder, guns lying around. Mm-hmm. Maybe don't post.
Maybe don't post.
Hashtag OPSEC. We got one more skateboarding dog, because that was kind of a skateboarding dog. We got two this week, two skateboarding dogs to close out the news. Talk to us about the cybercrime forum Leak Zone. Mr. Boileau.
So there is a cybercrime forum called Leak Zone, where you post much as you would expect, leaked data, stolen data, data dumps. The bad news for users of Leak Zone is that they appeared to leave one of their databases lying around on the internet without authentication, and UpGuard found it and had a rummage through, and it's user records, so like access records for the forum, so IP addresses, times and dates, and so on. So yeah, that's quite funny, I suppose.
It is
when you are called Leak Zone and you have all your stuff leaked.
Indeed. All right, well, that is actually it for the week's news. I do want to mention an announcement from a sponsor, and the reason I'm going to mention this now is because it's quite funny, because a little while ago we had Rad Security in the show as a sponsor, but I'd actually messed up the weeks. So we published the show with the wrong sponsor in it, which, as you can imagine, Tyrone Ferrier, who runs sponsorships here at Risky Biz, I think he nearly had a stroke when this happened. Because Rad Security wanted to run it this week because they had a big announcement coming up, and it's like everybody else's announcement, not to diss it, right? But they've got these things now called Radbots, which are agentic AI-powered digital workers, right? And it does all of the stuff that these AI agents are proving to be good at, things like triage and, alert triage and automating compliance help and whatever. So they've done that now. They're going to be at Black Hat, so you can go check that out. But I guess I did have a thought that's sort of relevant to the general show about this, which is I think if you're not doing this sort of thing in your security product now, I think you're going to get left behind, because everybody's introducing some sort of agentic something that is making their products easier to use. And I just sort of feel like unless the product is really outside of an area where that's useful, you just have to do this now.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be a thing that, despite there being all sorts of kind of concerns and skepticism, has, a skepticism that has, some real point in many cases, it is still really very useful in how people interact with complicated technical data, talking about it and accessing it in ways that are kind of more human friendly, more human centric. Like that really is a force multiplier for a lot of these systems. So yeah, I mean, much as it sometimes pains me that we bolt AI into everything, it kind of also makes it's like I found so many legitimate use cases for it and stuff that we do even, and it's always a bit confronting when your skepticism meets the actual, hey, this is quite useful.
Yeah. I regret to inform you it works is kind of the vibe there. So I did just want to mention that because I made a boo-boo with the sponsorship thing. So sorry about that, Rad Security, and everybody go check out their agentic AI. At Black Hat. But that is it for this week's news. Adam Boileau, thank you so much for joining me, and we'll do it all again next week.
Yeah, thanks very much, Pat, and hopefully you'll be feeling better by then.
That was Adam Boileau there with a check of the week's security news. It is time for this week's sponsor interview now. And this week's sponsor is Push Security. This is a company that I advise. They're part of that group of companies that I advise. And they do identity security, I guess. What they're really incredibly useful for is as a phishing control. So they plug into your browser and your users' browsers, and it can really track where users have SaaS accounts, if they're using vulnerable passwords, if they're using personal accounts at work and whatnot. And it really just does build a very complete picture of where users are going and what sort of accounts they're using. It can also detect phish kits very reliably. So, say a link comes in, your mail gateway misses it. This is that last mile defense where if someone actually loads it in the browser, it's going to find, it's going to detect that phish kit and prevent users from being able to enter credentials into it. So it is a very, very useful product. Dan Cuthbert works for Santander Bank, and he is here to speak to us about Push. Instead of it being someone from Push, we're going to speak to Dan about Push. And, Dan does a lot of sort of cybersecurity research and detection engineering and cool stuff like that. And he wanted to join us to talk about what you can do with the type of data that products like Push can give you in terms of telemetry. And he sees this as a future area, which is going to be, very, very useful to detection teams at large organizations. So here's Dan Cuthbert talking about that.
I think for me, what I'm getting out of this now, especially what Push gives us, is the whole context. So I know that a user's authentication is happening against an app, right? So you've got the normal flow, user logs in. What Push gives you is how they've logged in, what kind of authentication process, and once you delve into the authentication world, God, it's a mess, Pat. It's just, there are so many different ways you can authenticate and cross-authentication and so on. But along with that, you've also got the pattern of life. So have they ever logged in from this user agent before, from this IP address before? Have they gone in before with SSO, but now they're using a username and password? Has that username and password been seen in a breach? Is it a different time of day? There was a great quote, I think it was the Microsoft CISO who said it's an EDR for the browser, and I totally agree with that. You're now getting all this rich data that you can actually do stuff with to say, hey, that deviation of pattern of life happened. Why did that happen? You can dig deeper.
So one thing I've always wondered, right, is the reason this is useful is kind of because SaaS apps could never agree on some sort of uniform approach to logging, right? If they were doing their jobs right, if they all got together in some big little SaaS, circle around a fire and beat their chests or whatever, or did an incantation and figured out how to do uniform log sources, we wouldn't need this. But they never did that, so I guess we kind of do.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it on the head. Most of the SaaS apps out there, frankly put, I don't think do authentication properly. It's a mishmash of rush to markets, MVPs being done. Oh crap, we need to do this. Okay, but why is all the admin accounts not mandatory MFA by default out of the box, right? Why is it that I can't get any form of decent logs like you just said, where I can extract to say that user's never logged in from this place? Weird. Because they know that they've got that data, right? It's never presented to the endpoint. And I think that's where Push comes along and says, actually, we will give you that data. Stupid things like the agent itself, right? Or the browser. You've never seen that user use Chromium before, but now all of a sudden they're using Chromium at 9 p.m. at night to log.
And they're in Lagos.
Yeah, in a weird place. You would think that a SaaS app would give that data to you, but it's just you don't get it. It's really frustrating.
I think one thing that mitigates this, though, is like for a lot of that impossible travel and like, you know, checking to make sure the endpoint is, you know, roughly in line with what it usually is and whatever. I mean, don't the IDPs give you a little bit there?
Not as much as they should do. The way I almost look at the detection flow at the moment is my triangle of love, right? Everybody's mostly got an EDR. Everybody's mostly got an IDP. And then they've got something hopefully like push. I want all that data to be thrown into a pool somewhere where you can then map out to say, okay, we're seeing an anomaly there. We're not at that stage yet. Each of those components still operate really separately. And I think that's the frustrating part. And if you look at how most adversaries are now owning stuff, they are targeting one of them because whilst you have visibility there, you don't have visibility to the other things. And I think that's the frustrating part. And what I'm finding with push is that you can start to join these up really nicely. So you're finally having that first stage of, wow, it's 2025. I can get that impossible travel, but then I've got all the context I'm adding on top of it saying, we've never seen this browser. We've never seen this user agent. They're doing a weird IP, and I get you can spoof all of that. But for the pattern of life, you start to pull out that data and go, actually, this is really bad. The stolen credential user journey is fascinating. You know, we know that stolen credentials are very much a thing. We know that identity brokers make an obscene amount of money doing this kind of game. It was putting the pieces in place to show that, hey, a credential was used to try and authenticate to something. And I think that was really useful. That's the first one. I think the next thing is, for the first time ever, I've been able to build a tool that allows me to have this massive data set where I can really understand from A to B, the entire journey of the authentication process. That's beautiful. And then the third one is finding SaaS providers that should know better. Hey, here's the OWASP ASVS. Why are you not doing this? Like, it's a standard used by everybody. Why are you not adopting this? And I think that's probably, for me, the biggest bang for buck at the moment.
What is having push snitch on your SaaS providers?
Yeah, literally holding them to account now, saying why is it that, you know, MFA is not mandated for all high privileged accounts? Sounds super simple, right? And when you and Adam do your weekly thing and you talk about a breach, most of the times it's because somebody's grabbed a privilege token, they've done something with it because there was no mandatory extra security bolt at the time. Like, why? Why not?
It's sort of surprising, don't you think, that we haven't had much? I mean, it's not just push anymore. There's a couple more companies sort of moving around in this space, like doing a little bit more in terms of collecting data from the browser. I don't think quite as successfully, if I'm frank. I mean, I'm biased, obviously, because, you know, I work with push, but I just don't think they're quite there. But it's sort of surprising, isn't it, that this is a new field, like that this is a new category, that this is a new thing. Because it's one of those things that in retrospect, it's really obvious that you would want to have some sort of visibility into the browser.
Yeah.
But I think a large part of why we got here is because for a long time, we thought we were going to get this information with break and inspect. And, you know, if push could just do one thing by ending that, they will have done the world a huge service, I think.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't understand why it took us this long to have this mindset appear. You know, we're well ingrained with how EDRs work. Great, everybody's now building an EDR. It's not a uncommon thing, but it seems the browser space is still, everybody uses a browser. In fact, if I dare to argue, if you look at most organizations now, most employees will spend most of their time in a browser of sorts, right? Over, say, fat clients, or you might still have some of them, but everybody's browsing, right? That's how you interact with stuff. And
it's completely opaque to EDR as well. Like, people don't see it. EDR doesn't see it until something goes wrong and it starts like spawning weird processes, right? But like, what is actually happening within the context of the browser? It's like a big old mystery for CrowdStrike and whatever.
Yeah, like I feel like the browser is still that frontier where people are going, we've got no insight. We don't know what's happening there. It's just a browser. Oh, it uses TLS, so we can't see inside of it. But that's where all the juicy stuff is happening. And I think that's where the efforts that we're seeing at the moment from an engineering perspective with push and the others is pretty exciting, because we're closing that circle now, hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, do you see it as like, you know, what do you think about what I was saying before about how like this could be like us moving away from that break and inspect is the way to do this thing. If you want insight into web traffic, you do break and inspect, which is just getting more and more brittle, and like more and more people are realizing it's just like not a great way to do stuff. You know, do you think that's one of the reasons we're starting to see tooling pop up here?
Yes. I don't think the break and inspect model it's really hard to get right. You then have the problems of, okay, if you're doing full interception like that, where are you storing the keys? Is that going to be targeted? It's just messy. Whereas this model, it's less overhead, I feel. There's less impact on the end user, especially if sites are doing, proper security. They're not going to get all the errors like they do, and you get far more telemetry.
I guess from what you're saying, it seems like what using a product like this has been good for it so far has been like surfacing issues. Like, whoa, that SaaS provider is like doing something silly. Like username, there's username and password auth for this admin, and the password has popped up in a dozen leak dumps. You know what I mean? Like, we have a problem. It's that sort of thing, right? Just surfacing those issues.
Yeah. And stuff that we all suffer with as an industry. There was a great piece yesterday in the BBC about Knights of Old, how the 158-year-old company got lost because of a weak password being used. And you're like, okay, that shouldn't be the case. And it was unfortunate that did happen, but that is how companies are still getting owned. It's a very simple attack, but you just don't have the insight or the visibility.
Yeah, and it also snitches on users who are not using MFA for like important stuff as well, right? Like just across the board, not just administrators. You can say like, show me who's not using MFA for these services.
Yeah, also, I think if you now look at people, we don't just have a dedicated work life and a personal life. It's very much intermingled, right? During lunch break, I might go into PayPal and try and pay something for the kids, or I might buy something and I'm logging into this. I think it gives a good insight, and I think it was LastPass that was owned this way. Remember you and Adam talking about it, how they went after the personal account of the admin, right? So that kind of attack is still very much prevalent. And I think something like push and being in the browser allows you to see the path that an attacker might abuse to jump in and get tokens for something else if they own the browser and can get, extract tokens that way.
Now, look, I'm led to believe that you're actually working on some detection engineering that uses these log sources, but I'm also told you're going to be quite coy about exactly what it is that you're putting together. Can you give us some hints?
I will try and be as non-coy as possible. I think having all these sources now, so for example, knowing when a user is logging in and logging into a high-risk app, and you can enrich it using gray noise or IP info or virus total or Falcon, and you can do all the detection engineering stuff you've wanted to do for the last 5 years but never could. Now all the pieces are there. So now it's a case of just adding it all, querying the data set, in this case Postgres, and saying, show me any kind of deviation, or show me something that, it's almost like Minority Report with the 3 cogs. Show me something that could be bad happening in the future so I can preempt it now. Whereas everything else before was very reactive. Bad thing happened, crap, we need to do something about it. Now we're at a stage, I feel, with the data we've got where we can say, hey, if you keep on doing this, you're probably going to be owned. And that for me is a very exciting place.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, Dan Cuthbert, great to see you, my friend. It's been a while. Great to talk to you. Great to see you. And thanks for coming along to talk a little bit about how you are using telemetry captured from the browser to do some fun detections. Always good to see you, mate.
Thanks, Pat.
That was Dan Cuthbert there. Big thanks to him for that, and big thanks to Push Security for being this week's sponsor. And that is it for this week's show. I do hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back next week with more security news and analysis. But until then, I've been Patrick Gray. Thanks for listening.